In our frantic, fragmented, and often violent world, we can easily become separated from ourselves, from our own identity and integrity, from our own souls. What is it about the lives we lead that drives true self into hiding? When we have lost track of ourselves, how can we find our way home?
Whenever I speak with people about soul, I always try to acknowledge the fact that this is one of those words that has to be held very lightly because it points toward a mystery, and it's a mystery for which nobody has the true name or the real story. Every tradition has, I think, a different name for it. The Hasidic Jews call it the spark of the divine in every human being. Buddhists, I think, call it big self sometimes, or self with a capital S. Thomas Merton called it true self. Quakers, I'm a Quaker, and we tend to call it the inner light or the inner teacher. And I think all of these are synonyms for the same thing, and what that thing is, no one really knows. The best I can do is to say it's the being in human being. So what a person calls it doesn't matter to me, but that we call it something matters a lot. Since the soul itself is a mystery that nobody has a name for, I think the closest you can come is with an image or a metaphor. And the metaphor that I landed on some time ago, I've just found enormously helpful, which is this, that the soul, as I experience it, is very much like a wild animal. On the one hand, a wild animal has the capacity to survive in the deep, dark woods, in very difficult places where there's hardly anything to eat. A wild animal has strength and has resilience and has a kind of wiliness and a kind of knowing about survival that the human soul has, on which we depend. I think everybody who's ever been in a really tough situation would say, something inside me allowed me to keep going. Something inside me kept carrying me forward. So the soul has this strength, but at the same time, just like a wild animal, the soul is also very shy. And we know that if we want to see a wild animal, the last thing we should do is run crashing into the woods, yelling and screaming for it to come out. What we need to do is to walk into the woods quietly, sit at the base of a tree, breathe with the earth for a while, and eventually the thing we seek may put in an appearance. If it does, we may only catch it out of the corner of our eye. But to see something so original, so wild, so natural, so elemental, I think for most of us is never to forget it. I'm interested in in the divided life and the movement toward becoming divided no more, which isn't something that one becomes in an instant for all time. It's a decision that I think we make and remake throughout our lives.
We are born with a seed of true self that contains the spiritual DNA of our uniqueness, an encoded birthright knowledge of who we are, why we are here, and how we are related to others. But as we travel the tricky terrain between infancy and young adulthood, still close enough to our origins to be in touch with our inner truth, but aware of the mounting pressure to play a more guarded role out there in the world, our true self starts to feel threatened.
The idea of a divided life comes first from my own experience. I'm just aware of how often in my life I have felt it necessary to build a wall of separation between what was going on inside of me and what I was expressing outside of me. We live in a world where it feels threatening to let our own identity and integrity reveal itself. And so we build this wall, partly for interior reasons, and then I think as we grow older, we work our way through a series of institutions, especially schools and the workplace, where we're actively taught to keep that wall high and wide and thick.
As the outer world makes more demands on us, we stop doing the things children do to stay close to their souls, things like daydreaming and play acting. And the closer we get to adulthood, the more we stifle the imagination that these things require. Why? Because imagining other possibilities for our lives would remind us of the painful gap between who we truly are and the role we play in the so-called real world. As Thomas Merton once said, most of us live lives of self-impersonation.
The problem with this, obviously, is that the self, the true self, not the little ego self, the little selfish self, but the true self, the self as we were meant to be, wants to make itself known in the world, because ultimately it's the only gift we have to give.
The soul wants us to be grounded and true, to keep us connected to the community in which we find life. It wants us to tell the truth about ourselves, our world, and the relation between the two. It wants to give us life, and it wants us to pass that gift along to others.
I really believe that the gift we have to give to each other and to the world is not first and foremost in the skills that we went to school to learn, or the trained capacities that we've developed. Those are valuable, sure enough, but the selfhood that we can offer each other, the gift of identity and integrity, the gift of presence, to live a life in which you're not offering that gift, I think is somehow, we know intuitively that kind of life, it falls short of why we're here, who we were meant to be, how we were meant to be. I want to use this very simple piece of paper to just say a few things about how I understand a movement that we go through in life that has to do with the relation of our outer lives to our inner lives, our onstage lives on the front of this strip and our backstage lives. So On stage, I think we're worried about things like influence, image, impact. Am I making a difference in the world? And how do I look while I'm doing it? Do they like me? All of those kind of ego questions that come when we're engaged with the outside world. But backstage, I think the language or the concerns are very different. It has back here to do with intuition, with instinct, with value and belief, with faith, and ultimately, I think, with those deeper sources in us from which all of this comes, which finally I call soul, the being and human being, for which there are many names and no one knows the true name.
We are born into wholeness and integrity, with no separation between our inner and outer lives. But as time goes on, and we become more concerned with surviving and succeeding in the external world, we slowly lose touch with our souls and disappear into our roles.
There's a stage 2, which happens for some kids at home, happens for most of us at school, where we start realizing that it's not safe to be our backstage truth in the onstage world. That if we were to reveal too much of who we really are and how we're really feeling, the world would become a dangerous place for us. And so we start building this wall of separation. But I think what happens is that life becomes painful. This disconnect between the inner and the outer becomes very painful. And so at some point, for many of us, there's a desire to bring our lives into this classic shape of the circle, which means that I want what's important to me inwardly to become the principles around which my external life revolves. So that there's something like unity in my life. And in a lot of spiritual writing, we find the word that describes this shape, which is the word centering. I want to become centered, so that my values, my beliefs, my convictions become the sort of plumb line around which my external life revolves. That's a great step forward. And yet when you turn the image this way, you realize that what you're looking at, it looks kind of like getting the wagons in a circle or a gated community, a walled garden, where the tendency is to say, the only people who can come in here are the people who agree with me. I will exclude everybody who doesn't share my core beliefs and principles. And I don't think it's unfair to say that we see a lot in the world where people's spirituality is used in exactly this way. So that this becomes, despite its elegance and grace as a shape, just another kind of wall. It's a prettier wall, but it's still a wall in many cases.
And yet, that's not our only alternative.
We can separate the ends of that circle, flip them this way, reconnect them, and create this very interesting shape called the Mobius strip, which has the feature of being continuous and unbroken, so that you can put your finger on the outside surface, or what appears to be the outside surface, keep tracing it around, and pretty soon seamlessly find yourself on what appears to be the inside surface, keep tracing that around, and pretty soon come out on what appears to be the outside surface again. And you have to keep saying what appears to be, because the message of the Mobius strip is there is no inner and outer. The two co-create each other. And when I saw that, I thought, yeah, that's exactly what happens in life. Whatever is inside of me and of you emerges into the world, interacts with what's outside of us, which we take in and internalize, and in that interaction, in that exchange, we co-create what we call reality. It seems to me that ultimately there's just one question, for me at least, that one has to ask about this model of adult wholeness. And that is, as I travel this Mobius strip, between my backstage life and my onstage life, constantly co-creating. How can I become so aware of that exchange, that co-creative transaction, moment by moment, that I can increasingly make choices about it that are life-giving rather than death-dealing? To me, that's a very important question that links the inner life with the outer life. And I think the Mobius strip is the adult form of the wholeness into which we were born.